Hi, everyone. I could have shared with you a bunch of stories, pretty boring ones. I could have shared with you the just the names of people that used to own buildings on this beautiful embankment, but it's about just the highlights and interesting stories and all around that. Mm, Just a second. Someone's been trapped in the waiting room. But the waiting room is disabled anyway, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. Okay. Now these things happen, and whenever I can, obviously, I try to help. So I'll just quickly leave the direct link, and that would be it. So the English embankment is one of the most, I would say, expensive areas. Always was, has always been. It's still one of the very, I would say, super affluent neighborhoods in the very downtown. And I'm sure you remember this monument on the Senate Square and the St. Isaac's Cathedral behind it. So this is the very heart of the city. And this is also some of the old areas of the city where a lot of administration was located. And also on the two banks of the Neva River, there were two important embankments. So the bank of the river you see right now, I mean, on the other side is the Vasilevsky Island and the University Embankment. This is where a lot of educational facilities, including the Academy of Science, Academy of Arts, St. Petersburg University, that's where they are located. And as for the this embankment, it's mostly, well, some governmental administrative buildings, also Senate, the legislative body, and also a lot of homes of ambassadors, merchants, and many of them in the 18th century happened to be English, also Dutch. Why so? Because Peter the Great, the founder of the city, was building the fleet, and the Dutch and the English were the best at it. So he hired a lot of specialists from Europe, but mainly it would be from England, well, the English and also the Dutch. That's why there's no really Dutch embankment in St. Petersburg, but we have the little, well, the sort of the small Holland Island, so to speak, on the New Holland Island, which used to be one of the shipbuilding yards. And also here next, the English embankment also used to be a shipbuilding yard. The embankment itself starts here from the Senate building, this yellow one with white columns, and only in the 20th century, in 1994, the name of the English embankment was given back to this area just prior to the visit of the late Queen Elizabeth II. These are the photos from her visit, and I'm happy that the name has been returned to the embankment. And I totally believe that this is absolutely the best name for this embankment. A couple of buildings here don't really have a big story, and we just know that this plot of land was always busy, always belonged to someone influential, but all these buildings clearly changed its looks over the course of. Dolly, is there something that you need? Are we having an issue with the sound, with the connectivity? I've opened the chat just to make sure you're seeing me okay. Just let me know the chat is open for a second. Thank you, Sharon. Okay, Dolly, good. Then I can go on. Yes, and this building, well, it was not an exception. It looked differently. It was rebuilt multiple times. I, however, I've been able to find some photos that were taken on this embankment, and they've been taken different, I would say, over the course of past 150 years. And I found an interesting photo of the visit of the Lord Fraser of North Cape, so the Admiral of the Fleet, the Right Honorable. I mean, this is just a very important figure from the, I would say, in the British Army. But I found that actually there was a visit, there was a goodwill visit in 1946 to Leningrad. And as I said, the English embankment, as I've been saying it at every tour, it wasn't just a place where the rich merchants and politicians lived, where the ships were built, but it's also where, especially in the, I would say, at the turn of the 20th century and in the 20th century, a lot of embassies, European embassies were located. And also there has always been a very convenient embankment which was used for VIP guests, such as also all these delegations that visited St. Petersburg and then Leningrad over the course of this past, I would say, more than even 300 years anyway. So I had no idea of that visit. Well, it's, I would say, pretty okay because it's just post Second World War times, and we were allies, so this kind of means, well, yeah, that makes sense. So British Royal Navy visited Leningrad, and the photo was taken just next to this building on this very embankment. Every building changed hands at least 20 times just in this embankment. And there were a lot of names, just a lot of names. So this house, for example, was registered to the name of a wife of the general, Zena Dvornova. But that was a common practice. In most cases, we know nothing about these women. uh, in most cases, those women never even worked even a day in life to be able to afford to buy real estate like that. So it was just a common practice. I would say it's pretty much still the common practice. And next to this very building would be, or well, in the, let's say, in the 1900s, as you know, in this just by this embankment, the Aurora cruiser was docked. It was just here. And also, whenever there was some special event or just the training, some fleet training, the ships would be aligned exactly along this embankment, including the Aurora cruiser, the one that gave the signal, the blank shot that was the sign to storm the Winter Palace by the Bolsheviks. We spoke about it also in the previous episode. And by the way, I owe you an apology. So last time the connectivity was pretty poor, and I did not really have a good picture on the tour. The sound was okay, but the picture was not. So I re-recorded it, and, and now this is kind of my way to make up to the issues that occurred while watching and doing the tour. Another house which I would say stands out a little bit. It looks, I would say, much older than the other buildings. This looks um, more ornate, smaller, but still lovely. And as you may have noticed, the decoration on the facade is very new. There is, well, I would say every building on this embankment has been quite recently restored. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that the restoration has been carried out also from the inside. It's not a guarantee. And also, even though there are doors but most buildings are not really accessible. Well, for example, right now, this building belongs to a private entity, but one of the, I would say, latest owners of it before the revolution struck, that was the Frederica Radau. Frederica was the wife of a German merchant, under whose name the house was actually registered. That was it. And what we know is that after the revolution, the family, the German merchants, they not fled when the First World War started. This is something quite unusual because when the First World War started, as you know, there were a lot of anti-German moods. Well, even over here, there is the coat of arms of the Radau family. You see the letter R. I think you can clearly see that. And this is interesting because, well, let me just give you one example. The name of the city was changed. The entire city of St. Petersburg was renamed into Petrograd. And that's exactly Petrograd that was stormed, that where the revolution happened, but not St. Petersburg and not Leningrad, which is the Soviet name. So most German families, German embassy closed down and families moved when the First World War started. But the Radau family stayed. And I wish I knew why and how did they manage to pull that through, but they did. And they only fled after the revolution, immediately after the revolution. So I have no idea how they managed. There's no really, we don't have much information about this with this family. And after that, uh, we know that during the Soviet period, there were several organizations housed there, some bureaus, some administrative, well, some administration, and then right now it belongs to a private entity. In this building, however, yes, restoration was carried out. I have been able to find photos. They are not my photos. They are just in open access. And I'm a bit concerned about the floor, to be honest, because the floors are clearly um, not authentic. There's just big tiles you can find in hospitals and in some, governmental institutions. So I am not entirely sure whether they decided to go with just to go as it is with the tiles like those, or they eventually changed it because I only have photos that were taken in 20. I think these photos date back to 2017 or 2019 maximum, but at least you can see some decorations, you can see what clearly survived, and I don't know what's going to be. Well, I mean, I don't know what's going on there now. I'm not sure about the interiors, if they have been all restored or they just saved whatever they could. That's hard to tell. Another building, uh, it belonged to Samuel Craig in the 18th century, 1700s. Samuel Craig was actually a Scottish, um, well, military man, specialist in navigation and shipbuilding, and he came to Russia and he served served to Catherine the Great. He took part in a lot of campaigns in the Crimean War as well, the one in the 18th century when Crimea was for the first time uh, taken by the Russian Empire. And he was a hero of multiple battles, a close friend, and a very reliable confidant of Catherine the Great. So that's why when he was wounded, Catherine the Great was shattered, and she sent her best doctor and another confidant, John Rogerson, to to the military outpost where Craig was hospitalized, but nothing could be done at that point, unfortunately, and Craig passed away. However, he had left his son in St. Petersburg. But we'll talk about it in a minute. So let's speak about John Rogerson. John Rogerson was basically a neighbor to Craig. He lived a couple of buildings away. We saw his house in the previous episode, or maybe two episodes ago. Another Englishman, but he was not a shipbuilder. He had nothing to do with the military. He was a doctor, and he was the private doctor of Catherine the Great. Obviously, he wasn't the only one, but he also happened to have become a close friend, a very reliable friend. He was so reliable that I have been able to find I would say, quite recent article about Dr. John Rogerson uh, on the BBC. So you see, it's December 2023 that for some reason he, he was remembered and they all of a sudden decided to publish an article about Dr. John Rogerson, who wasn't even a military man. He was just a doctor and the trusted confidant of Catherine the Great. So that's an interesting story. And he uh, he continued serving. He served to Catherine the Great. He definitely she was quite a healthy woman in general, and it was believed that Catherine the Great thought that it was exactly thanks to Rogerson's expertise that she had been that healthy. She had issues with her legs closer to her, I would say, 60s, but let's say she had very good skin. She had very healthy teeth. She had all her teeth when she passed away. That was quite unusual. Uh, that was, I would say, something extraordinary because, well, there was not really good dentistry. They did not really cure the teeth, and the easiest option would be just to get rid of a tooth. So that's why by 50 or by even earlier, I would say a lot of nobility, let alone ordinary people, actually happened to be a bit toothless, a little bit, just missed a couple of teeth here and there. Yeah, so that was quite unusual. So, and when he passed away, there was even an article in the British newspaper about his passing. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? And well, thanks to BBC, I know now that the house where he lived after Catherine the Great passed away, and even during her reign when she was still around, he could go back and forth home. And after she died, he would be coming to England more and more often. But in general, he started spending more time at home rather than in Russia. So that's the house where he actually was born, even. Yeah. And speaking of Craig, so the Samuel Craig who passed away at the battlefield, well, it's not like he was killed. He was just wounded, and the consequences were unfortunately disastrous. So, but he had a son. His son Alexei Craig. He became a naval admiral and a very talented captain. He was born. Maybe it's explained because it can be explained by his biography because Samuel Craig's son Alexei was born in Kronstadt, which was the military naval base for St. Petersburg. And that town was all about navigation. When even the main church, St. Nicholas Church, was all about navigation and the sea. So both Craigs were really respected and honored in the army and in the fleet and by the Romanovs in general. So, and this is the house where Samuel Craig happened to live. He didn't own the house, at least, no, it's not exactly so. First, he rented the house, then he purchased the house, and then he sold it again, but continued living there for a while until he just passed away, basically. And as for his son, I am not entirely sure whether he ever lived in this house at all. I would say most of the time he definitely spent in Kronstadt. But Craig too, he had to be there quite often. And I found some photos on the internet of the interiors of the house. And this is not something I actually expected to see. Yeah, unfortunately, the um, the interiors were not in a good condition, at least back in 2020. There wasn't a research facility located there in the Soviet times, some mechanical institute, and I highly doubt that some mechanical research, some research facility of mechanics had lilac walls like these with this plaster decoration. And um, honestly, I'm not entirely sure if that's possible. Also, I'm not sure whether this is the original colors. I don't think so at all. And here comes a question: when was the house repainted? When were the interiors repainted? But well, it is what it is. Uh, but we can imagine how lovely it looked. Um, for some reason, I see this ugly green painting as well. Sorry, was a little bit cold today. And this is clearly from the Soviet times. And you know what the Soviets would normally do? They would just paint the walls, and they would just paint over um, some wall decorations, frescoes easily. But seems like here, just the furniture was standing, and they basically decided not to paint this lilac. Um, just they didn't even move the furniture to paint the walls. So that's clearly some 20th century decoration, or maybe even 21st century painting of this lilac color. Well, nevertheless, another house, and well, Sharon, you may find it quite familiar. We see here coat of arms of Sweden. That's because this used to be a Swedish embassy for a long time, actually. There's no Swedish embassy at the moment, and well, you can see that the building is kind of empty. And well, I'm not entirely sure what's going on there at the moment, but at least when I still lived in when I was living in St. Petersburg, so I knew that the embassy was not really there. Well, and that's exactly well what I was talking about. So even if the facade looks lovely, it doesn't mean that the inside is ready or there is, any organization staying there. Maybe it's just empty and not even in use. So that's one of the examples, clearly. I found some photos. Again, the restoration is still going on, from what I know. The photos were taken in early 2020s. There was also a research facility. In the Soviet period, there was also a research facility located there, but in the imperial period, so this house started also housing the Swedish embassy. Look at the beautiful elevator box. Fireplace. Technically, it was not really in such a bad shape at that point, technically speaking. Tiles, I'm a big tile fan, so it's nice to have it. And obviously, there were found a lot of newspapers and other items, other artifacts, and it's nice to read some fresh press from uh, 1918. House of Richard Sutherland. Another merchant, Richard Sutherland was, I would say, one of the most successful businessmen. He came to Russia. Actually, he came into his own during the reign of Elizabeth and stayed throughout the Catherine, well, throughout the Catherine the Great reign. And he became, not only did he become one of the richest people in the city, he also was involved in all the political situation in different negotiations. He was kind of a negotiator, and a lot of I would say, state level deals were closed, were signed actually with his support. So he was trusted. He was respected, and this was his house, one of his houses. Obviously, people of such, I would say, level, they had a lot of real estate everywhere, and that's the same story. Unfortunately, in 1799, he passed away. He was still quite young. He was in his 60s, early 60s maybe, or around that. And that was, I would say, quite unexpected. Yeah, quite unexpected. But the interesting story is that after his death, this house was given to Maria Perikusitina. Who was Maria Perikusitina? Actually, Maria Perikusitina served Catherine the Great. She was her she was her maid. She was her assistant. Originally, she basically cleaned for her and helped her. Well, she was some sort of a lady in waiting. She started off like that, and later on, as she start got older, she was given a different function, so to speak, or maybe a different position in the court, and she served Catherine the Great for 40 years. And after Catherine the Great passed away, just in case you forgot um, who Catherine the Great was and how she looked. There you go. That's Catherine the Great. And when Catherine the Great passed away, this is an interesting story because, as you know, the next to rule was Paul. Yes, yes, go ahead. Was Paul. And Paul hated his mom so much that he normally would do anything to make her angry. And he would do everything absolutely contrary to what she would have done. But for some reason, he was very generous and kind to Catherine's illegitimate son, so called to his a brother from another father. But we spoke about it on one of the previous tours, so I'm not going into details. I'm talking about the Count Bobrinsky, and also Paul gave to Perikusichina he just gave it to her for free. It was a gift, kind of a thank you gift after 40 years of service. He gave her that house and also an estate in the somewhere in the countryside, not far from St. Petersburg. So I would say that was a very, very good thank you gift. And she obviously she was no longer, even when she still served Catherine the Great, she quite quickly became a kind of a PA, right? A personal assistant to Catherine and a close friend. And also, well, she knew a lot of, court secrets. She knew a lot of people, and we don't know a lot of things. Thank you so much. We don't know a lot. I would say she knew a lot of secrets we don't know. So that was quite a story, right? So yeah, it's in a way kind of that American, not American dream. It's kind of a Cinderella story in a way. I don't know if she was even married. No idea. But anyway, so that's quite interesting. She was definitely an exception because normally I would say only 0.05% of St. Petersburg population could afford at least rent, not even owning, but just renting, any building or a floor in a building, on this embankment. And it's pretty much the same, I would say, pretty much the same. But I would say there's just a couple of buildings that are owned privately by some people, but most of it it's actually the property of big companies or state organizations. And one more story that I would definitely like to share with you, and I'm so happy that we have enough time to talk about it, is the story of the house that's, well, the pink one that you have just seen. It's not even a house, I would say it's a palace, and it's the palace of Alexander von Stiglitz. And his name may ring a bell to those of you who have done the tours of the whimsical Stone Island or who joined one of my tours about my wedding. Um, well, Alexander von Stieglitz, he was the one of the, I would say, richest men of the 19th century Russia. He was there at the right time at the right place. He is the one started building the railroad system in the country and many other things. But he was called the Railroad King, that's for sure. And he quite quickly, well, almost overnight, he became rich. And this was one of the buildings he owned in St. Petersburg. Again, it's a palace. However, that's pretty the same story here that I would say that the facade, all the facades, by the way, on the embankment were restored in 2007. But unfortunately, we don't know what's going on in the house itself, inside the building. It now belongs to the university, to St. Petersburg University, and the university was supposed to start the restoration at its own expense, but I don't know how much has been done at this point. It doesn't look very inhabited. It doesn't look, I would say that there is a lot of life going on, but I may be wrong. So, but Stiglitz was the son of his father. So his father came to Russia, like many Europeans, and um, originally Stiglitz were Jews, but they converted to Lutheran faith. And as you know, probably from a Jewish heritage source, that it was never a problem of ethnicity. It was only a problem of religion. So in the Russian Empire, Jews were restricted to do a lot of, well, were prohibited to do a lot of things and restricted from many things just because of their faith, not because of their uh, nationality, right? Not because of their background, but just the religion. So once you converted to any Christian faith, it didn't even have to be Orthodox religion, right? It didn't have to be Orthodox Christianity. Well, they were already exempt of all the issues at all of anything. So that's what the Stiglitz did. And so the son of Ludwig von Stiglitz, Alexander Stiglitz, Alexander Ludwigovich. So yes, it's kind of a Russian version of a German name that was thrown into a patronymic name. So he became one of the richest people in the country. He was so rich that he invested bazillions of rubles, I don't know, dollars. Um, actually, and I'm not even joking because in art. So rubles, dollars, and maybe other currencies were invested in construction of this art school, applied art school in St. Petersburg, which is a gorgeous building inside out. And it was all built, decorated, and equipped with his own money. And when I said different currencies, I wasn't even joking because apart from the railroad, he also basically, Alexander von Stieglitz, he was a financier. First, he was an investor and financier, businessman, and he opened a bank. And he basically, I would say, started a banking organization that the predecessor a lot the predecessor of the State Bank of Russia, but that would be already in the 20th century when it would be officially established and then re-established in the Soviet times. But in the 19th century, it was the first steps, and he started also the banking activity with Europe. So that's why I'm saying that, technically speaking, it didn't have to be just Russian currency at all. This is the monument to him found in the in the Academy of Applied Arts. I even took you to this academy on one of the tours, and we must have passed by it on one of my walking tours, even back in the days, back in times where I lived in St. Petersburg. Yeah. So as you can see, there's nothing going on there clearly. However, the facade looks lovely, but I would say it's just a veneer because unfortunately, from what I know from my colleagues, and it looks like there was one kind of maybe there was a church, right? I mean, there definitely was a church. We can see that. But from what I heard from my colleagues, very few interiors actually survived. So whether they are planning to restore it or not, that's a good question, and I don't have an answer to that. But I have a lot of watercolors, a lot of illustrations of the interiors. It was by right one of the most expensive buildings and opulent interiors in the entire city. And I think it can clearly uh, compete with the Hermitage, with the Winter Palace. This is something I would say quite outstanding. And the interesting thing is that Alexander von Stiglitz and his wife Karolina, they didn't have children. They eventually had one child which they adopted, and I spoke about that story on my Whimsical Stone Island tour. That was a girl that was basically left by their door one summer morning. By the way, this is the study of Karolina von Stiglitz, the wife of Alexander. There she goes. I've only been able to find one portrait, but I think it's good enough. And that happened to be, and they knew, Alexander von Stiglitz knew from the very beginning that that had been legitimate of one of the sons of Emperor Nicholas I. And he knew that it was exactly Nicholas's, he was sure it must have been Nicholas's idea to give it this child to Alexander von Stiglitz because Nicholas I knew how badly von Stiglitz wanted to have kids, but uh, nothing, I would say nothing really worked for them. And so that's why when imagine that that girl, so that child, Nadezhda, she was given the last name Iyuniva because she was found in June. So Iyun is June in Russian. So she basically, well, according to what we understand, she was a daughter of a Grand Duke Romanov and one of the ladies in waiting. And that's another story, some sort of a Cinderella kind of story, because a girl of such descent originally would never really would have had even a would have had, I would say, zero chance of finding yourself finding herself um owner of all these of this big, I would say, financial empire that her father had built. Anyway, she inherited this house. However, she already lived elsewhere and she didn't need such a burden, so it was decided to sell the palace. By the way, I found also another a postcard, and the postcard was taken somewhere around this area. Well, I would say not really far. And again, here happened to be a lot of docks and it was just a pier. It was all fully equipped for, I would say, not really big cruise ships and not even like big vessels, because big vessels would normally be reaching Kronstadt, and then people would change to smaller boats, and then they would be able to use just to change for smaller boats and come to the city. That was a common practice. And also that was the exactly next to this house, there was the pier that took people from St. Petersburg to Peterhof. Over here to the right, there is a ship and there is a pipe and it's written Peterhof there. It kind of was Peterhof pier, so to speak. I've also been able to find photos. So this is the photo of the church. In the Belgium, it was a very common practice for every palace like that to have a small home church. So that's the same story here. I don't know how much of the church has survived and what's going on there right now. Well, but yes, there was a church. This is the photo of the courtyard and some photographs taken in 1870s. Uh, I mean, it looks like a royal palace, and Alexander Stieglitz was not royal. He had no relation to the Romanovs. Well, technically, after adopting Nadezhda Yuneva, he was related to the Romanovs, but no one was supposed to know that. But he knew that Emperor trusted him so much and that secret was safe with Stiglitz. And also Nicholas first knew that the girl would be in good hands and would no longer need, well, would never really need anything and would have everything she could ever dream of. The courtyard, just another angle. So, but eventually, as I said, she decided to sell the palace, and the palace quite quickly found a good owner. I would say another celebrity, in a way, Grand Duke Pavel Alexandrovich, or Grand Duke Paul Alexandrovich, who was mm, the youngest son of Alexander the Second. And Alexander, uh, Grand Duke Paul purchased this palace for himself and for his new wife, Princess Alexandra of Greece. And they lived in this palace quite happily, but not really ever after because she passed away. And he was left alone with two kids. Those kids are Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich and Maria Pavlovna. These two characters may be well familiar to you because I've spoken a lot about Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich in connection with Rasputin because he happened to be one of the plotters, one of the people involved in the plot to kill Rasputin. And Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna was his sister. She was not involved in the plot, at least directly. There's not a single mention, there's not a single document that mentions her as one of the people involved uh, in that assault and that murder. But we know her also because I spoke about their life in exile, right, in immigration. And Maria Pavlovna managed to turn her talent and her hobby into a very good source of income because of her embroidery and the fabric that she had created would be the big inspiration for Coco Chanel. Yes, so she worked for Coco Chanel. She supplied fabrics, textiles, and her embroidery for the costumes. And this is the photo of the great Duke Pavel Alexandrovich with two of his kids, right from the first marriage, Dmitry Pavlovich and Maria Pavlovna. However, it's really hard to imagine, but let's say it wasn't always like that. In fact, when his first wife passed away, he met another woman. But that woman was the wife of one of his aide-de-camps. He was obviously a military man. So that woman that he fell in love with, she was married, and she was married to someone he worked and served with. But I would say they just couldn't resist it. And he started seeing that woman. She got pregnant, and they got married. She had to get a divorce first, and they got married. So eventually, Paul was exiled from the country, and the children were well, they were not exactly adopted. well, let's say the Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich and his wife Yelizaveta became the foster parents for these two kids. They were still really just kids when it happened. So Sergei Alexandrovich was the elder brother of Paul, and Elizabeth, I'm sure you remember her. She was the elder sister of Alexandra Fedorovna, wife to Nicholas II. So Princess Elizabeth was granddaughter of Queen Victoria. So they were foster parents to the two children. Here is the photo. The photo was taken even before they officially became the foster parents. So this is Grand Duke Paul sitting with a little kid on his lap, and his sister is on uh, in the hands of Yelizaveta. So, but later on, eventually. Um, Well, as I said, Grand Duke Paul remarried, so his wife was Princess Olga Paley. Paley was her last name from her first husband, and she kept that last name. But then, after they got married, she eventually was given the title of Zarnikau, and she also was another title was the Countess von Hohenfelsen, Princess Paley, Countess von Hohenfelsen, and Zarnikau. That was her title. But obviously, she was of a much lower descent than her, I would say, very royal husband, basically. After some time, however, he was allowed to return. He wanted to serve in his country. When the First World War broke out, he decided to he asked for the permission to come back and serve in the army, and he was given permission to do so. By the way, with Olga Paley, they had a lot of children, and like I think four children altogether. So it was, I would say, it was not just a flame. It was definitely a big love story. And he was allowed to come back to St. Petersburg, and he and his children from the previous marriage, they even got along. So they kind of got back together. And the children of Paley, Olga Paley, this is Olga Paley in the photo. So the children from her first marriage and the kids from the first marriage of the Grand Duke, they got along, and they would be quite often seen, hanging out together, going to parties together, studying together. Well, I'm sharing here this photo because Grand Duke Pavel Alexandrovich was one of those Grand Dukes that were executed in 1919 by the Bolsheviks somewhere on the territory of Peter and Paul Fortress. As I told you, as I showed you on one of my St. Petersburg Fortress, Peter and Paul Fortress tours, there is, well, we know for sure there is a, a mass grave, um, well, where the Grand Dukes were buried, but the burial site is still not known to us. Allegedly, we think we know the place, but um, as long as there's no really, I would say, an expertise held, we don't know, and we'd rather say we don't know where they are buried. And exactly because Dmitry Pavlovich, who was Grand Duke's Paul son from the first marriage, because he was friends, he kind of, you know, kind of forgave his father for everything. He was quite frequent in his father's house. There are tons of photographs of Grand Duke with his car in the courtyard, because Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, he was rich, right? He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and he had many cars. He took part in also car racing competitions in Europe, including Monaco, and several others. Uh, And that's it is believed that this is one of the houses where where the plot was discussed. The thing is that technically speaking, I'm not going into the story of Rasputin, and also because we don't really have much time. But what I want to say, and we're going to wrap it up in a couple of minutes, so technically I'm not even overrunning yet. Uh, as you know, Dmitry Pavlovich and Felix Yusupov, their idea was to lure Rasputin to their place, and the only way to lure him into Felix Yusupov's house was to say that Irina Alexandrovna Yusupova, and she was actually Romanova, she was niece to uh, well, she was the sister to Nicholas II, and aunt to the children, to his children. She was married to Felix Yusupov, and Rasputin really wanted to meet her. So Felix Yusupov lied to Rasputin, saying that Irina would be there in the house, and there was a party. Rasputin was invited, and everything and everything. There was no Irina. Irina had been elsewhere, so she was not in the palace when the murder took place. But they had to kind of make Rasputin think that there was a party going on and there was Irina in the house. And that's why, even though there's not a single document that proves that, but also there is not a single document that kind of disproves the story. The thing is that but I think that they definitely needed someone to at least, well, to make some noise, occasionally laugh. They needed somebody, some women. So Rasputin had to hear some women's voices heard. And the two candidates would be Marianna Pistelkors, who was actually the daughter from the first marriage of Olga Paley. Marianna von Pistelkors, daughter from the first marriage, and as I said, so the both, I would say that the children of the from the both marriages, they were friends. After the revolution, Pistelkors, oh sorry, let me get back, managed to, she was an actress. She managed to escape, and after the revolution, she became an actress, and she even featured in the Song of Russia movie by, I think, Metro Goldwyn Mayer. Yeah, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, MGM. So she died in New York, if I'm not mistaken. And the other possibility, the other person that was allegedly present in the palace when the attack happened was Vera Karali, who was a mistress of Grand Duke Pavel. And sorry, Dmitry Pavlovich, not Pavel, but she was the mistress of Dmitry Pavlovich, so the son of Grand Duke, and that they were dating at that time. So it's also highly likely that she could have been in the palace on that night. But that's just, I would say, an assumption, not really my assumption. Definitely not. But this happens to be one of those houses where I would say it's quite likely that Dmitry Pavlovich discussed the details of the plot with his stepsister. Okay, this is where we wrap this up. So I don't really want to overrun. Hello to all those who joined us a little after we started. Sorry for the interruptions. Unfortunately, I couldn't do anything about it. The chat is open. Let me know if you have any questions. And I would just like to repeat you that in after 1 hour break, I will be doing two tours back to back. It's going to be a Palace of Oldenburg in Tbilisi. And then the Christmas and New Year traditions in the Romanovs family. Also, if you missed my live stream from the agrarian Christmas market in Tbilisi, well, that tour definitely is worth watching if you have time. It was fun. It was lovely. We got to meet a lot of local farmers and artisans. We got to taste some good wine and some other good food. and also talked about and saw the attributes of the holiday in the in Georgia. So yeah, you have all the links. Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you everyone for joining. So you have all the links for tonight. Tomorrow it's the Hanukkah Jewish Heritage Tour, a bit slightly Hanukkah themed, a bit of what we have seen already, and also something that we have not seen. I'll try to kind of, I would say, find a happy middle here. Then tomorrow we're finally visiting the Central Christmas Market in Tbilisi and gonna be singing, listening, and talking about the 19th century Romance songs in Russia, and then the Temple Mount. That's the plan. I journalized that it was written 7 p.m. Interesting as always. 7 p.m. Mm, I think it was originally 7 p.m., but then I switched to 8 p.m. because because of the market that I had to do. So it was originally 8. Yeah. So it should have been updated if you kind of add it to your Google Calendar, it should update. I'm not sure why it doesn't, because normally it does since it's Eventbrite booking and it's kind of integrated in Google Calendar and everything. Sorry for that, dear. But it's been recorded, hopefully. Yes. So it means I'll be able to share the recording at some point. Yeah, I'm not even sure when I changed the schedule. I always have to tweak it from time to time I have to. Well, I got a little cold, yeah, wearing it's kind of a home wear with the with the poo. It was the first thing I had. I came like 10 minutes before the tour and I had to sort things out with the neighbors and I had to just throw something on, and this was the first thing I got. Thank you so much. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, everyone, for joining. So I would appreciate your support. As you know, you can leave me a PayPal donation, or you could buy me a coffee or coffees, depending on whatever you deserve, or whatever you prefer, whatever I deserve. And here we see the links. So PayPal, buy me a coffee, my website that has a lot more links available already, and also my YouTube channel where all the live streams are, where I keep the recordings of all my tours, and okay, it's time to have something to drink. Um, and I will see you in an hour from now, even less than that, for the 2 back-to-back tours, all about the opulence and the royal style. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Maria, and I will see you soon. So, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, have a great weekend, everyone. But thank you so much for finding time during this busy time of year to join me, be it just one or two or all the tours. Thank you and bye bye.